Chapter 5. Uberman dove down from the stars, ready for battle, his body aimed, his muscles poised and rippling under his costume. His cape and long hair moved in silky waves behind him as he flew. The Spectrum, who is the League's most easily recognizable hero next to Uberman, emitted a tangible rainbow bridge of color from his fingertips that let the bus glide smoothly over the last deadly holes in the bridge. Then Uberman landed on the front of the bus with a graceful plink, lifted us, and suddenly we were airborne. The passengers on the bus cheered. The man in black, now useless in the driver's seat, looked at me through the rearview mirror. I caught myself looking up at Uberman with sheer awe. The man in black sprang from the driver's seat and went after the villains in the back. Snake was the only one who looked like he could put up a decent fight at this point. Snaggletooth and Vamp were down for the count. When he reached them, the man in black hesitated for a moment before he threw a punch and looked back in my direction, just enough time for Snake to wrap his protective arms around his partners and pry open an emergency exit window. The man in black didn't try to stop them, and suddenly he was beside me. I could feel the heat of his breath on my neck. He grabbed my hand hard like you would discipline a child. I'd been so busy staring at Uberman that I'd taken my hand off the young mother's wound. The man in black looked deep in my eyes. I was so mortified that I let my attention wander. I wanted him to pull off his cowl and say something. Instead, he placed my hand back on the mother's side. She was now unconscious. My powers had been more effective than I'd expected, but as soon as I'd taken my hand off, the wound had begun to gush again. Now I kept my hand firmly on it. I couldn't look at the man in black in the eye after that. Snake enveloped his partners in one single swipe, bundled them to his chest, and spread out his back, King Cobra style, like a parachute. The bottom half of his body morphed into a coil, and he bounced from the bus like a loaded spring. The man in black came within a millimeter of snatching Snaggletooth's paw as they floated away and disappeared into the darkness. Another slight jolt to the bus, and we looked down through the gaping slit in the floor and saw the river below us as we flew through the air. The lady in the muumuu held her hand to her chest and crouched down by the wall, like she was afraid she might fall through. Then we saw a warrior woman piecing the floor back together like a zipper, one chunk at a time, and all the passengers began to applaud. Uberman opened the door politely. "You're safe now, folks. Back on good old terra firma." There was a flash of silver, and suddenly Silver Bullet stood above me. "I'll take it from here, young man." He scooped the bleeding young mother into his arms and whisked her off, presumably to the nearest hospital. In the seat next to us, her little girl pulled one of the tangles in her hair. Tears began to well in her eyes. "Where's he taking my mama?" "Wait," I called out. "You forgot about her?" Another whir of light, this time golden, and suddenly Golden Boy, Silver Bullet's longtime sidekick, appeared in front of me. "We never forget," he said without an expression. In a flash, he'd cradled the little girl and was off, kicking up some dirt and grime from the floorboard in my face. As I rubbed a tiny piece of gravel out of the corner of my eye, I'd wondered if he'd done it on purpose. I stood and dusted myself off and saw that the lady in the muumuu was already deep in the thrall of Uberman, who was unwedging her from one of the seats. On the street outside, reporters, cameramen, and adoring fans swarmed the League. The lights lit up Uberman, Warrior Woman, and Spectrum, a.k.a. Dr. Roy G. Biv. And then the sea of media parted to make room for the long-standing leader of the League. Justice raised his hand high, a command to listen, and the crowd obeyed. "Nothing to see here, folks, just doing our jobs." He spoke plainly in the voice of the common man, but with just enough grave authority to give his words weight. Justice had been the League's leader ever since I was alive, but the guy was in better shape than I'd ever be. He had to be only a few years younger than my dad, and I wondered about the secret to his longevity in a business that seemed to spit out a new, rabidly popular teen superhero group every year or two. The mob of reporters was shouting questions on top of each other. It was bedlam. We'll comment on all of that, and we'll answer all your questions at the proper time. Right now, you'll have to please let us go about our job protecting you, the people. Justice was a real pro with the press. His voice remained calm and reassuring. Despite the pandemonium, he never got testy, never raised his voice. I thought I heard a few reporters shout out some questions about his feelings on the death, but I couldn't figure out what that was all about, since as far as I could tell, there were no casualties on the bus. Then I remembered the young mother and my heart sank. I couldn't believe how dumb I'd been to take my hand off her, even for a second. If she died, it would be my fault. I saw Uberman over by the police barricade lines as he signed autographs for throngs of women who screamed for his attention. He was in the process of asking a woman with fake lips how to spell her name. Is that Bambi with an I or two? I looked down at my hands and saw them shaking with leftover energy. My heart was still pounding, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins, and I wanted to run a few laps around the block to burn it off. There were no reporters around me, so I actually dropped to the ground to do push-ups. Nice job back there, kid. I looked up and Uberman was standing above me. My heart leaped into my throat and I hopped to my feet. Uberman, it's an honor to meet you. He was going to let me touch his hand. I couldn't believe it. I wiped the gravel off my palms and shook his hand. I stood there awed and speechless. This is the part where you're supposed to tell me your name. Oh, I said, Tom. My name's Tom. I was just, taking the bus because my car broke down and some pretty nifty powers you have there, Tom. You'd better be careful or you might put me out of business one day. He gave me a big chuckle and a mock punch to the shoulder. Humor wasn't his strong suit. He should stick with Ernest. Still, who cared? God, he was touching me. My hand was buzzing from the contact with his skin. He wiped a long strand of luscious platinum hair out of his face and smoothed it back over his ear. An eternity passed as I stood there studying his face, trying to memorize every detail, every perfect feature. He didn't seem to mind. He let my eyes wander over his face. I was like a kid watching a Disney cartoon for the very first time, absolutely mesmerized by the wonder of it all. The lights from the camera crews lit up his face. Okay, so maybe his eyes were a little too far apart, and maybe that nose had been shaped so perfectly with a little help from the right nose doctor, using the old deviated septum excuse. I was still about to pass out from his beauty. My eyes worked him from his chin to his chest, from one ear to the other, and he soaked up the adulation like you'd bask in front of a sun lamp. My eyes ended up right above his left ear, where I spotted the man in black standing far behind him in the shadows by a piling underneath the freeway overpass. He was far away, small in the distance, but I could tell he was looking right at me, and even his mouth covered by his dark cowl, I could tell he was frowning at me. His eyes worked like a mirror, and I could suddenly see myself standing there, my mouth open, gawking at Uberman, with a dull grin plastered on my face, drool practically spilling off my lower lip. My eyes darted back and forth, distracted, between Uberman's bright face and the man in black's burning stare. What is it? Uberman whipped his head around to see what could possibly interrupt a fan's dream chance to worship him. But the man in black was gone, vanishing into the shadows. Uberman turned back to me, and I felt guilty for not asking this sooner. Is she okay? Silver Bullet suddenly appeared next to us. Is who okay? The woman you took to the hospital. Golden Boy suddenly materialized at Silver Bullet's side, his voice like an echo. Of course she's okay. We took care of it. I didn't like the way this Golden Boy said we, as in not you. Even though he was wearing a mask, I could tell by his voice and attitude that he wasn't all that much older than I was. He stood with a strong, rigid posture, arms folded across his chest. Come on, Francis, we've got to go. Justice called a press conference. Silver Bullet tugged on Uberman's cape. Okay, just a sec. Uberman said to his less popular teammate in a tone that reminded him you don't get to be Uberman by shortchanging the fans on their star time. Francis? His name is Francis? Uberman shook my hand again and smiled serenely. I appreciate all of your help, Tom. Keep up the good work. Silver Bullet and Uberman headed back into the crowd. Golden Boy deliberately knocked his shoulder into mine as he breezed past. I stumbled, tripped over my feet, and the next thing I knew I was sprawled out on the pavement. The pictures in my jacket flew out of my pocket and scattered like a game of 52 pickup. God damn it, I cursed like my dad. Uberman and Silver turned around and saw me on the ground and my family photos everywhere. They looked to Golden Boy for an explanation. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like he'd just noticed, jerk. Then playing the Good Samaritan, he began to zoom around, snatching up my pictures off the ground. I was sure Uberman and Silver Bullet must have thought I was a clumsy goof who couldn't keep his balance in the presence of such greatness. Suddenly I was back on the basketball court, and I wanted to knock that golden shithead onto his golden ass. I got to my feet, wiped more gravel off my cheek, and felt really stupid. The heroes crouched low on the ground and picked up my pictures. I saw Silver Bullet glance down at one of the shots and freeze for a second. It's still the only time I've ever seen him perfectly still. He looked down at the picture, then up at me, and then down at the picture again. A second later, I saw him pull Justice aside from the crowd. He pointed at the picture and then nodded towards me. Justice looked over at me, and I held my hand up above my eyes to block out the glaring lights of the cameras. All of a sudden, I wish I knew some of the Man in Black's tricks, namely how to disappear into the shadows. Uberman and Golden Boy each handed me a stack of my photos, and the next thing I knew, I was shaking hands with Justice himself. Warrior Woman and the Spectrum stood shoulder to shoulder behind him. "I believe this is yours." Justice handed me back my picture, "and I hear congratulations are in order. Is this your first save?" Here they were, the League themselves, Justice himself, talking to me after a daring rescue. This was every kid's dream, and I was living it at that very moment. I should have been soaking it up, but there was a queasy feeling in my stomach, and once again I knew I was the world's worst liar. I couldn't take much of the credit. I helped out a little, that's all. I plunged my hands into my pockets. It was mostly the other guy. I nodded to the shadows in the piling by the overpass, the one in black. Warrior Woman and the Spectrum shared a look. "Dark Hero," Silverbullet snapped. "You don't want his kind of help." He shouldn't even have the right to call himself a hero, not with those tactics. Apparently Golden Boy had to say something nauseatingly kiss-ass every time Silverbullet spoke. Justice looked down at me. For the first time I realized that he hovered a few inches above the ground, which made him slightly taller than everyone else. I had seen him on TV before and knew he always hovered in the air, but until I saw him in person, I didn't understand the effect. You always had to look up to him. "It's okay, Tom. It's just that he gives people the wrong idea about what we do, always keeping to the shadows like that, administering his own brand of justice like he's above the law. Like he has something to hide." Warrior Woman spit-shined her helmet. "We have to be very careful about the message we send," Justice said. "There are a lot of people who look up to us, you know." I felt all eyes on me again and thought about my own secrets, and I wished I'd fallen through the holes in that bridge after all. I shifted my weight uncomfortably to my other foot. Justice then lowered himself to the ground and handed me a card. "Tom, I came over to meet you because we think you have potential. With the right work ethic, the right amount of practice, and the right influence, you could be someone people really look up to." He squinted and studied my face for a reaction. "How would you like that?" I stared at the card in my hands. It was an invitation to League headquarters for a tryout. I thought for a second that he'd handed it to me by mistake. "You want me to try out for the League?" Justice smiled. "Only if you think you're ready." I scanned each of the heroes' faces to see if they were serious. "It would just be a tryout for probationary status." Justice glanced at Silverbullet, and I could have sworn I saw the speedster wink at Lightspeed. "If the tryouts go well, you'll be paired with a team to learn how to use your powers, trained to be a hero." Okay, sure, thanks." It hadn't struck me yet that Dad would kill me if he knew any of this were taking place. Holy shit. Justice gave me a warm smile and put out his hands to seal the deal. "That's fine, Tom, just fine." He shook my hand vigorously but carefully. It made me wonder if he had to be vigilant about his super strength all the time. He probably could have ripped my arm off if he wasn't careful. These powers of mine, well, they're really new, and I don't know that I'm all that good with them yet." I watched Justice levitate a little higher above the ground. I didn't want them to expect too much of me. "It's all right, son. We'll help you. See you next week." Justice returned to the press. Silverbullet pointed at the invitation. "The time's wrong. We're going to meet in the afternoon instead," he explained, "because of the funeral." "Oh, okay." I nodded like I knew what he was talking about, even though I didn't. What funeral? The rest of the League shook my hand and left, until it was just me and Golden Boy. I saw Silverbullet nudge his sidekick forward before he sped off. We stood face to face, and I noticed we were the same height. His serious expression didn't crack. Mine didn't either. Neither of us said a word, and I wasn't about to break first. Then I saw something well up in his chest, like he was about to say something, and he shook my hand. "Good luck." He sped off, and I tried to decide if he really meant it. After everyone left, I looked down at the picture Justice handed me, my mom's favorite picture. Mom, Dad, and me, surprises on our faces as the contents of a can of beer exploded under pressure. On my way home, I thought I saw a hint of a cape disappear behind a corner. Maybe Dark Hero had witnessed that whole episode with the League too. Maybe he could explain to me what had just happened.